Hello, everyone, and welcome back to our Connect Church Discipleship Podcast, Season 5, Episode 2 now. This season, we're looking at our emotions and relationships, and we're in a series on emotional health. Last time, we saw that our spiritual formation needs to include our emotions in all areas of our lives. We can't just segment it out. And we looked at some scriptures kind of seeing where God expresses emotion, how we're created with emotions, and then maybe some of the challenges we see in our culture with that. And so we learned all that last time. Pastor Frank is back with us again. Thank you, sir.
Thanks for having me.
All right.
Still.
Hey, man, it's a pleasure. It's a pleasure. So we learned about God creating us with emotions last time. So we talked a little bit about the challenges of culture.
Yep.
What do you think are some specific challenges for disciples of Jesus in navigating emotions and having good emotional health?
Yeah. So I feel like disciples of Jesus typically fall into a bunch of different camps, right? I either ignore them, and I think we were even just talking a little while we were setting up, right? Where it's like to show any kind of emotion is almost seen as like you're not trusting God, right? And so like there's that camp. Then I think there's the camp where it's like feel everything but don't speak truth to it ever.
Yeah.
And that doesn't help either. And so I think it's honestly finding a healthy way of like knowing this exists but still growing and not letting it dictate everything I am while also healing and getting help that I need and all
Yeah.
those things.
Yeah, I feel like you painted two ends of a spectrum,
Mhm.
right? That we kind of lend to. I heard someone say once that, and I've always loved this quote, that feelings are good helpers, but they're not good leaders,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
And so like we don't want them to lead us in what we do, but at the same time they're not evil,
Mhm.
right? And we can't just stuff everything away.
Mhm.
So let's kind of tackle both of those
Yeah,
challenges a
yeah.
little bit in this if we want to have good emotional health.
Mhm.
How does someone know if they're led by their emotions?
Mm.
And if they are, is that necessarily a bad thing?
Yeah, it's funny, right? So being led by your emotions isn't always a bad thing. You know, we're about to read a story where it's not. You know, Jesus is led by his emotion in the temple where he throws people out because he's mad at what they're doing. So, like, I think scripture shows that there is a need to acknowledge and know the feeling that I'm doing. Um, but then I think it's the motive of, like, why is this leading me to this? Is this to just rage at the emotion that I'm feeling? Is it just to do something to make myself feel better, or is it to bring heaven to earth, right? And I think like if this emotion is stirring something in me to reconcile heaven and earth again, that's a good thing.
Yeah.
But I think the reality is most of the times they don't, right? I'm just mad and I want to be mad,
Yeah.
or I'm just anxious and I want to feel anxious and not get out of it, or just numb myself so I don't feel these things anymore. So again, how do I know if I'm led? I mean, I think it's is there just something welling up in me and I act on it, or am I taking time to process it?
Yeah. I like what you said there about taking the time to process, right? Because I feel like that's a step we often miss.
Yeah.
And then we come back with that regret.
Yeah.
Like if I would have actually thought about this and
Yeah.
is it true, is it
Processing
not
it
true?
in the wake of the disaster
Yes.
that I
Yeah.
caused. Yeah.
Absolutely. Okay, great. So let's read a couple examples. We're going to look at King Saul.
Okay.
1 Samuel 11, 5-7 says, Just then Saul was returning from the fields behind his oxen, and he asked, What's wrong with everyone? Why are they weeping? They repeated to him what the men of Jabesh had said. When Saul heard their words, the Spirit of God came powerfully upon him, and he burned with anger. He took a pair of oxen, cut them into pieces, and sent the pieces by messengers throughout Israel, proclaiming, This will be done to the oxen of anyone who does not follow Saul and Samuel. Then the terror of the Lord fell on the people, and they came out together as one. My man, he's burning with anger and slicing up animals, right? But the context of this is he's hearing that an Israelite town is being attacked. And so his anger leads him. I'm going to assemble the troops, and I'm going to go save them and rescue these people that are being attacked. Okay, we fast forward a few chapters. We're going to see anger come up again for him. 1 Samuel 18, 8-11. Saul was very angry. This refrain displeased him greatly. They have credited David with tens of thousands, he thought, but me with only thousands. What more can he get but the kingdom? And from that time on, Saul kept a close eye on David. The next day, an evil spirit from God came forcefully on Saul. He was prophesying in his house while David was playing the lyre as he usually did. Saul had a spear in his hand, and he hurled it, saying to himself, I'll pin David to the wall. But David eluded him twice. So context here, David's getting some popularity over Saul, and this time anger is leading him, I'm going to try to kill David in this, right? So what's the difference here? Like we generally view the first account as good and the second as bad, but he's being led by the same emotion each time. Share a little bit on that.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it just comes behind the motive of it, right? Again, like one was self perseverance for Saul, and the other was for the benefit of the people, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's the big difference. Um, and yeah, I think that there's two framings, right? Redemptive anger, which I would say the first one is, and then there's the destructive anger that like under the surface, just like brewing anger that you just are ready to, and that seems like the second one.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think a lot of times and again, depending on what side of the pendulum that people may be on with their emotional health, we could automatically view emotions as evil. Certain
Mm-hmm.
ones, like, hey,
Yeah.
anger is evil. Like, okay, no, let's sit back and process
Mm-hmm.
that. I heard someone say this once. I don't know who it was, so I can't give them credit. But they said the feelings themselves are true, but the stories that they're telling may or may not be true.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right? There may be a moment where I'm angry, and the story it's telling me is yes, go do something about this. And there may be a spot where I'm angry, and the
Yeah.
story is like, no, you really shouldn't.
Mm-hmm.
And so we have to take that time to investigate that.
Yeah.
You shared a couple things already, but is there any other ways that you can think of how you feel emotions, but not let them control you in a way that would be destructive?
Yeah. So I think it's I'm teaching my 2-year-old daughter this right now of like, okay, you're feeling mad, just take a couple breaths.
Mm-hmm.
Are you still mad? Okay, let's figure it out then without
Yeah.
throwing the toy, hitting your brother.
Yeah.
And it's funny as I'm teaching her this, because I've read books on parenting and all that, I'm like, I probably need to start doing this myself a little bit more, right? Before I say that stupid thing, like, okay, a couple breaths. All right, am I still feeling anxious, angry, whatever it
Mm-hmm.
is, sad? Yes. Okay. Well, all right. What's the root of this? All right. I think I have it figured out a little bit. All right. Let me call my wife into it a little bit and be like, hey, I'm feeling this. Like, do you see this? Does this make sense? Yes or no? And because again, my instinct is ignore or lash out. And right, like, it's just not healthy.
Yeah.
I'm not going to have good relationships and I'm not going to have the abundance of life that Jesus promises in that cycle. So
Yeah.
it's figuring that out.
And I think something in your story that's interesting there is you're doing that to help your daughter,
Mhm.
right? Sometimes even as adults, we need people to
Yeah.
like we need others
Yeah.
to play that role
Yeah.
maybe for us
Yeah.
to help us
Mhm.
process those things
Yeah.
and kind of hit that pause
Hmm.
button there a little bit
Yeah,
for
yeah,
us.
exactly. Which is not really a common thing, like peer to peer.
No,
Like it's
makes perfect sense with your
yeah,
daughter,
yeah. It makes sense
right?
with my daughter. I have authority over her. Where
Hmm.
like if one Sunday I'm pacing in the back and you just went, dude, take a couple breaths. I think the first time I'd be like, huh? And then I'd be like, oh, alrighty, as that's a good thing. But
Yeah,
yeah, just not really a
yeah,
common thing.
yeah, sure. All right, so that's one side.
Mm-hmm.
That's if we find the challenge of I feel every
Yeah.
emotion, and I think some people feel their emotions more than others,
Mm-hmm.
right? And there's
Yeah.
nothing wrong with that, and they feel that and they acting out. Okay, that's one end.
Mm-hmm.
But what about the other end? You might have some people. I stuff the emotion. I
Mm-hmm.
put it away. I don't want to deal with it. So what's the danger on that side for the person that is ignoring?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I'm not acting out. I'm not lashing in my
Mm-hmm.
anger. I'm not doing. But they're stuffing those emotions away.
Yeah, I mean, you can ignore them, but it will cost you. And at some point, it will either come to the surface in a way that is unhealthy and will
Hmm.
cost you,
Yeah.
or you'll keep it under the surface forever. And like on the external, you may look okay, but on the inside, you're bitter, you're angry, you're all
Yeah.
of these different things. And so, um, again, anyone can ignore them, but I think long term, is it healthy? Probably not.
So with that, is there any spiritual implications of ignoring? You say, okay, whatever,
Hmm.
I'm unhealthy on the inside.
Hmm.
Like, is there any spiritual connection to that?
I mean, Jesus spoke pretty harshly to all of those things, right? I think that was one of the main tensions between him and the religious leaders. Even they weren't murdering people,
Mm-hmm.
but they were a jerk to everybody. And so
Yeah.
he's like, what's up with that? So I think, and scripture speaks about the importance of the heart, right? So, like, again, if I have these emotions and they're just buried and I'm never dealing with them, our heart is affected.
Yeah.
And scripture says over and over and over again, right? If your heart is hard or it's overtaken by the cares of the world or all these
Yeah.
different things, right? The gospel seed is really hard for it to grow to the point of fruit.
Yeah.
And so I think the spiritual implications are so much bigger than I think we even realize.
Sure. Absolutely. Good. So we asked this before. How do I know if I'm led by emotions? Let's ask the opposite. Like, how do I know if I'm someone that stuffs them away? Because maybe I think like, oh, I don't stuff my emotions. I'm like,
Yeah.
good, but maybe with some ways I could tell that.
Yeah. I would ask, like, when is the last time you had a healthy conversation about them?
Mm-hmm.
Like, as a suppressor for a long time, right here, I'm like, I just never talked about them.
Yeah.
And now that like I'm aware of them more, like there are just times where I just need to again talk through, like, I'm feeling this, why is that? And so I would say suppress. How do I know? They probably aren't talking about them. they're probably telling other people not to feel them. They're often very
Yeah.
vocal about that,
Yeah,
right?
that's a
Like,
good one.
stop feeling that. That's
Yeah.
bad. And then I think that they probably have very strong shows of emotion along the way.
Yeah.
That's typically how it comes out.
Yeah. Yeah, something you're saying there really resonates with me because I read this book, Dr. Anita Phillips. I think it's called The Garden Within.
Mm-hmm.
And she was talking about just having the ability to name
Mm-hmm.
what you're feeling in a moment.
Yep.
And I think I could do that with many emotions, but some like anger, I often don't.
Mm-hmm.
And I was reading this in a separate book. Someone was like, they were talking about a similar concept, and they're like, look, I don't say I'm angry. I say I'm frustrated.
Yeah.
And I'm like, oh, that's me to a T. Like, I won't say, oh, I'm really angry about this. This irritates me. I'd be like, oh, I'm frustrated right now about whatever. And it's like the fact that I can't name it
Yeah.
and can't say, no, I'm mad. I'm angry. Here's why.
Yeah.
So I think that's a good growth step
Yeah,
for
yeah,
me.
yeah,
But
yeah.
that also the sign sometimes of I'm stuffing that down because I don't want to
Why
deal
do you
with it.
feel like it's bad to say you're angry?
I don't know. I just think it probably comes a little bit to like I tend to associate anger as a negative emotion, even though it's not necessarily a negative emotion. So like I don't want people to think like, oh, I'm not healthy in that
Yeah,
way,
yeah, no,
So
makes
probably
sense.
approval,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
If it gets it back to
Yeah,
the
yeah.
idols,
Yeah,
right?
that makes sense.
But that's the hard thing, right?
Yeah.
And so like even at home, like when I get mad at something that's going on, I've been trying to be like, I'm angry right now, like, and I just need to be angry for a minute, and that's okay. But just
Yeah.
kind of take a step back. But in the past, I'd be like, I'm frustrated, and
Yeah.
Megan would always make fun of me. She's like, that means you're angry.
No, I'm
And
not
I'm like,
angry
and I'm
yet.
like, no,
I'll
I'm
show you
frustrated.
anger.
I'm
Yeah.
frustrated. She's like, no, you're
That's the
angry.
older generation would often say to me, I'll show you anger. I'm not angry.
That's right. So, all right. So those are some of the challenging ways, and we probably covered some of this already. But what are some ways then to process emotions healthy, no matter what side of the spectrum that you're on?
Yeah. Again, healthy. It's being in tune, and I think it's avoiding some of the unhealthy things that I think, like in church, we're really good at them, right? And we mask it. I just jump from church to church to church, so I'm not known, and I just keep chasing the spiritual high. And if I find it, I stay there for a little bit until people start to put a finger on it, and I run to the next one. As Americans, again, we're really good at just numbing ourselves through binging episodes on that, scrolling social media. I mean, we do so many different things just to numb ourselves and to avoid what's really going on. So again, I think to be healthy, let myself feel it, have people that I trust, get a therapist if needed,
Yeah.
like do the hard work.
Yeah.
Again, if these emotions are coming to the surface, they're pointing to something going on in my life. And how do I do that in a healthy way? It will look different depending on what it is. Even this week, I think I saw a picture. It was like what to do with certain emotions. Like if you're sad, draw. If you're angry, run. And so I was like, oh, it's helpful. I screenshotted it just so that like in the future, and see if it helps me with some of those things.
Sure.
Whereas opposed, right, in the past, I would probably, if I'm angry, just seclude a little bit until it calmed down. If I'm anxious, just try and grab on to control a little bit more and check a couple more boxes off. So, yeah.
Everything you said there makes me feel like we can't leave this area to chance.
Mm-hmm.
Like we can't just be like, okay, I'll eventually just get better at my emotion. Like this is intentional things, right? If we need to go talk to a counselor, like that's an intentional step. If I'm going to intentionally take a screenshot so I could begin to do something different next time, that's an intentional step.
Yeah.
So we got to kind of be direct with this. And again, back to our idea for this season, it's our whole life.
Yep.
Right? It's not just segments of I did my practices kind of thing.
And I would say, right, the whole point of our journey with Jesus is being intentional. And like you said, this is a segment, right? And that's why we're doing pipeline and all of this stuff, because if we're not intentional, it's to chance, like you said. And like, do I really want to leave all this stuff to chance?
Yeah, absolutely. All right. So one last question for us today in terms of our topic before I get to know you. What would you say the relationship is between our physical, emotional, and spiritual health? And we'll include mental with emotional. Like is it really as intertwined? Like we're kind of talking about this or not?
Man, I'm learning it's so much more intertwined than I realized. I think even this morning we were talking of like, I grew up in church. We made it clear all of the things that were bad to deal with our emotions, but like eating was fine. And so like I just developed some really bad eating habits. And so like I'm trying to work through sugar, and it's like when I don't eat sugar, the rest of my life, like I sleep better. The inflammation in my body goes away. I'm more steady throughout the day and not high and low.
Yeah.
So they're all incredibly intertwined, and I'm sure probably even more than I know. And so again, it's like you said, right? We can't segment these things. All of these things together make me healthy. And if I'm healthy, I think that I'm in the best position to know God and to
Yeah.
love others.
And I love the example you gave because, like, in a sense, that's a physical example, right?
Mhm.
So it's like when you're loving God physically,
Mhm.
it's also going to help you love Him with your soul
Yep.
and your heart, right?
Yep.
Because, like, I think about Elijah, like when after he wins the battle on Mount
Mhm.
Carmel, right, and then he wants to die,
Yeah.
and the
Yeah.
Lord's like, take a nap and eat.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like, basically, you know,
Yep.
you
Yep.
need to recharge yourself.
Mhm.
Like, and it's funny when we were talking about this morning, right? Like, I think we were referring to another
Mhm.
podcast that we were listening to, and like one of the things the guy talked about in there was like he was talking about Tom Brady and like Tom Brady was doing something with like a lot of traumatic
Yeah.
brain stuff,
Yeah. Yep.
and he's like, so he knew he had to go to bed at 9 p.m.
Mhm.
right? Because like that's good for
Yeah.
him
To
and
wash
good
his
for
brain so he
yeah.
woke up
Yeah.
renewed. Yeah.
And so like sometimes too, even for our emotions, like if we say, hey, I want to get better at processing this. Maybe it maybe not for everybody, but for some of us, it might be we need to sleep better, or we
Yeah.
need to eat better,
Yeah.
or we need to
Yeah.
whatever,
Mhm.
so that because it's all connected
Yep.
in those ways. That's how the Lord has
Mhm.
functioned us as a whole unit.
Yeah, and this might be a sideshow, but I think the biggest thing then too is like I need to put boundaries where it's important,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
right? Like studies will continually show 8 hours of sleep is crucially important. Some of us means that's a boundary on our phone, our
Yeah.
work,
That's good.
like put work down. Again, if it's eating, you have to put boundaries around the things that you're eating. If it's your relationships, again, boundaries around people who are
Yeah.
unhealthy, and be willing again to do work. Do I want to be healthy? And if so, then it's going to take some work.
Yeah, absolutely. I love it. Okay, so our get to know you question for today. What's one item that you want to own that you don't currently own?
An Acura NSX.
Oh, that was quick.
That's my dream. I want that car so bad.
All right.
Yep.
Well,
People will judge me for it when I'm a pastor coming in a $200,000 sports car. But you heard it here. It's been my dream forever. So.
we have video evidence of this now when that ever comes to pass. So, all right, there we go. Well, that's our second episode in this series. We got one more to go, but it'd be a great time. Text your disciple. Just let them know. Maybe even let them know what end of that spectrum you're on. And this way they can begin to pray and start some dialogue on that. And then come back next time as we conclude this series on emotional health. Take care, everybody.